In the shadows of the Pacific Northwest, a predator hunted for nearly 2 decades, leaving a trail of terror and heartbreak. The setting is Seattle, Washington, in the 1980s, a thriving city marked by growth and opportunity, but also by a dark, unspeakable reality. Over the years, scores of women began disappearing, most of them young and vulnerable, vanishing from the streets without a trace. Families searched for answers, while fear gripped the community, knowing that someone, somewhere, was watching and waiting. For years, the person responsible would remain hidden, blending into the fabric of everyday life. Despite a massive investigation, he evaded capture time and again, slipping through the fingers of law enforcement and leaving detectives frustrated, confused, and desperate for leads. How did a seemingly ordinary man evade capture for so long, despite being right under the noses of investigators? It began quietly, almost unnoticed. In the early 1980s, police in the Seattle area started receiving missing person reports, first one, then another, then another. Young women, mostly in their late teens or 20s, had vanished without a trace. Their last known locations varied, but the circumstances were disturbingly similar. Many were last seen near the airport strip or other isolated areas of Seattle, places frequented by women who were often overlooked, some struggling to survive. Family members, desperate for answers, reported their loved ones missing, but in the chaos of a rapidly growing city, these disappearances went largely unlinked at first. Shattered in July 1982, when the body of a young woman was found in the Green River, a quiet waterway just outside the city. She had been strangled, her body hidden beneath the murky water. A few days later, another body surfaced, and then another. Seattle authorities were facing a grim discovery, a possible serial killer hiding somewhere within their community. The Green River would soon become synonymous with death, as body after body appeared along its banks. Panic began to spread as the sheer horror of the situation dawned on the city. As more bodies were discovered, a haunting pattern began to emerge. The victims, often young women from vulnerable backgrounds, had been strangled, each discarded with chilling precision. Authorities would later piece together Ridgway's terrifying method. He lured his victims by offering them rides or promising money. He acted casual, even friendly, leading his victims to believe he was just another man passing by. But the moment they were alone, his mask dropped. Ridgway would take them to secluded spots, where he would brutally strangle them and leave their bodies by the Green River or in wooded areas. Shockingly, he often returned to these sites, revisiting his crimes and taunting the memories of his victims. Each detail pointed to a calculated killer who took pride in his evasion of the law. The discovery of these bodies sent shockwaves through Seattle. The idea of a killer on the loose, someone capable of such cruelty, shook the city to its core. Word spread quickly, and fear gripped the community. Women, especially those in vulnerable situations, were terrified, taking extra precautions, sticking to well-lit areas and traveling in groups. Families and friends clung to their loved ones, hoping they wouldn't be next. In a city that had once felt safe, there was now a lingering sense of dread and invisible danger lurking just out of sight. The Green River Killer had cast a dark shadow over Seattle, and no one knew who he was, when he might strike again, or how long he would continue his reign of terror. With the discovery of multiple bodies near the Green River, Seattle's local police force faced the harsh reality. They were dealing with a serial killer. As panic set in, they established a dedicated task force solely focused on tracking down the elusive predator. The Green River Task Force, composed of detectives, forensic specialists, and profiling experts, worked day and night, piecing together every shred of information they could find. But as more bodies were uncovered, it became clear that local resources alone wouldn't be enough. The FBI stepped in, bringing their top behavioral analysts and criminal profilers to assist. It was one of the largest manhunts the region had ever seen, a combined effort between local and federal agencies. Together, they were determined to hunt down the killer who had turned Seattle into his hunting ground. Early in the investigation, police began exploring every possible lead. They interviewed anyone who might have crossed paths with the victims. Tips flooded in from concerned citizens, each hoping to contribute to the case. Investigators had a series of initial suspects, men with violent histories or connections to the victims. But with each interview and interrogation, one suspect after another was cleared. Detectives also began to consider whether they were dealing with more than one killer. Could it be that other serial predators were at work in the Seattle area? With no clear leads, they looked into known offenders, including notorious figures in nearby cities. but nothing concrete came from these efforts. Theories swirled, and the lack of progress left both the task force and the public on edge. As the investigation dragged on, the task force began to piece together certain clues left at the scenes. Bodies were often found in secluded, wooded areas near the Green River, some partially clothed or with personal belongings left behind. Investigators found fragments of clothing, personal items, and, in rare cases, physical evidence that hinted at a violent struggle. As they sifted through these clues, detectives started to see patterns. The killer's methods, how he approached his victims, where he left them, and even how he arranged the bodies became clear. They began using these patterns to link previously unsolved cases, building a grim portrait of a meticulous predator who was both careful and calculating. But despite these small breakthroughs, no single piece of evidence could definitively identify him. The Green River Task Force faced overwhelming challenges from the start. In the 1980s, forensic technology was limited. DNA testing, a powerful tool we rely on today, was in its infancy and unreliable for cases like this. Detectives had to rely on older methods, witness statements, psychological profiling, and circumstantial evidence. But witnesses were scarce, and even when they did come forward, many struggled with memory gaps or reluctance to cooperate, especially those who feared retaliation. There was also the sheer volume of cases. With new bodies being discovered, detectives found themselves stretched thin, balancing the weight of unsolved cases with the constant pressure of fresh horrors. Each new report of a missing woman brought urgency, yet each piece of evidence left them with more questions than answers. Despite the mounting evidence, the constant search for suspects, and the tireless efforts of the Green River Task Force, the killer remained just out of reach. Each clue seemed to lead to another dead end. Each promising suspect eventually walked free. But even as hope began to fade, the investigators remained resolute. They were chasing a shadow, a ghost who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. Yet they knew that every piece of evidence, every suspect ruled out, was one step closer to the truth. As the Green River Task Force continued its relentless investigation, they sought out anyone who may have encountered the elusive killer. Many witnesses had seen him without realizing the danger lurking just beneath his ordinary appearance. He was, by all accounts, unremarkable, a middle-aged man with an unassuming demeanor who blended into the background. Some witnesses described him as polite, even kind, someone who seemed harmless on the surface. But there were also unsettling stories. Women who recalled feeling a sudden sense of dread around him, or those who remembered a man matching Ridgway's description offering them rides late at night. These testimonies, while vague, painted a picture of a man skilled at hiding in plain sight, slipping into the shadows just as quickly as he appeared. By the late 1990s, the investigation had reached a standstill. But as new forensic technologies emerged, a glimmer of hope appeared. DNA testing, an innovation that was revolutionizing criminal investigations, had improved to the point where even tiny samples could yield reliable results. Investigators knew this was their chance, and they carefully reviewed every piece of evidence from past crime scenes. Samples that were previously too small or degraded to test were re-examined with the new technology. In 2001, the breakthrough finally came. Forensic scientists matched DNA found on multiple victims to one man, Gary Ridgway. After nearly 2 decades of terror, the Green River Killer finally had a name. The revelation sent shockwaves through Seattle. For detectives who had spent years trying to identify the Green River Killer, the moment was surreal. Many had dedicated their careers, putting in endless hours and sleepless nights, haunted by the faces of victims whose names they had come to know well. For the community, Ridgway's arrest was both a relief and a chilling reminder of the danger they had lived with for so long. But as more details about Ridgway emerged, his ordinary life, his quiet job as a truck painter, his seemingly mundane existence, shock and disbelief rippled through the public. How could someone so unremarkable, so ordinary, have carried out such monstrous crimes right under everyone's noses? The moment of Ridgway's identification marked a turning point in one of America's most infamous manhunts. Years of tireless work, interviews, and frustration had finally led to the unmasking of the Green River Killer. But while the task force felt vindicated, they knew their work was far from over. Ahead lay the trial, the confessions, and the search for answers about how this unassuming man managed to evade capture for so long. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was at work, completing what seemed like another ordinary day as a truck painter at a local factory. But the authorities had a plan in motion. Detectives approached Ridgway calmly, almost casually, masking the weight of their intentions. They informed him that he was being taken in for questioning. Ridgway complied, perhaps unaware of the evidence now stacked against him. At the station, they conducted a simple, non-invasive procedure, a saliva swab. This swab would ultimately confirm what investigators had long suspected, that Ridgway was the man behind decades of horror along the Green River. When news of the arrest broke, Seattle was gripped by shock. The unassuming factory worker, with a seemingly ordinary life, was finally unmasked as the Green River Killer. 2 years later, in 2003, Gary Ridgway appeared in court, finally facing justice for his crimes. The world watched as he entered the courtroom, his face expressionless, almost eerily calm. In a shocking turn, Ridgway pled guilty to the murders of 48 women, a deal struck to spare him from the death penalty. The court allowed him to describe his crimes in detail in exchange for avoiding execution, and his confessions were chilling. He recounted each murder with disturbing precision, describing how he would lure his victims, how he chose his locations, and even how he would return to the sites where he left them. The courtroom was silent, each detail more horrific than the last, as Ridgway revealed the calculated nature of his brutal spree. The prosecution built their case meticulously, armed with the DNA evidence that linked Ridgway to multiple victims, along with his recorded confessions. Each piece of evidence was presented carefully, painting a clear picture of Ridgway's guilt. Prosecutors argued for justice on behalf of each victim, describing the devastating impact of his crimes on families and the community. In response, Ridgway's defense team sought to negotiate a plea. By pleading guilty to 48 counts of murder, Ridgway aimed to avoid the death penalty, knowing his cooperation would be the only way to ensure he would spend his life in prison rather than face execution. The defense presented him as willing to cooperate, highlighting his confessions as a way to bring closure to the families. But for many, this plea deal was a bitter compromise, a life spared for a man who had shown no mercy. The trial was one of the most widely covered events in Seattle's history. News outlets from across the nation reported on the man who had evaded justice for so long. As the details of Ridgway's crimes came to light, the public reaction was one of overwhelming horror mixed with relief. Relief that this monster had finally been captured, but horror at the scale of his crimes and the coldness with which he described them. People struggled to reconcile Ridgway's ordinary appearance with the monstrous acts he had committed. For families of the victims, the trial offered a painful kind of closure. Justice was being served, but it could never erase the suffering that Ridgway had caused. Gary Ridgway's arrest and trial brought an end to one of the most notorious crime sprees in American history. His guilty plea saved him from the death penalty, but offered the public a glimpse into the mind of a man who had haunted their city for nearly 2 decades. Ridgway's confessions laid bare the dark reality of his crimes, but they also provided answers to families who had waited years for justice. For the people of Seattle, the trial marked the close of a dark chapter, but the scars of the Green River Killer would remain, a reminder of the terror that had once gripped their city. On November 5, 2003, Gary Ridgway stood before the court as the final sentence was read. For each of the 48 murders he confessed to, he was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, minus 48 life sentences, one for each life he had stolen. Ridgway stood quietly, emotionless, as the sentences were pronounced, while family members of the victims watched, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and relief. This moment marked the end of Ridgway's reign of terror, but for many, the weight of his actions would linger far beyond this courtroom. As news of Ridgway's sentencing spread, the community's response was layered with complex emotions. Relief swept through Seattle. The man who had cast a shadow over their lives for 2 decades was finally behind bars, unable to harm another soul. But the sense of relief was deeply intertwined with grief and anger. The city mourned the lives lost, the families shattered, and the years spent living in fear. Vigils were held in honor of the victims, as the public came together to remember the women who had been taken too soon. Although justice had been served, the scars left by Ridgway's actions would not easily fade. For the families of Ridgway's victims, the sentencing provided closure but not peace. Many had spent years in anguish, searching for answers, hoping for the safe return of daughters, sisters, and mothers. Now they were left with the painful truth and the haunting finality of Ridgway's confessions. For some, the sentencing was a step toward healing, a confirmation that their loved one's killer would never walk free. But the emotional toll of Ridgway's crimes ran deep, leaving lasting impacts not only on the families but also on the broader Seattle community. For years, the Green River Killer had been a ghost haunting their city, and though he was finally captured, his legacy of fear had left a permanent mark. Ridgway's case underscored serious gaps in forensic technology and investigative resources that had delayed his capture for years. In the aftermath, there was a greater push for advancing forensic techniques, particularly DNA analysis, which had been instrumental in identifying Ridgway. The case highlighted the importance of early intervention and the need for authorities to act swiftly on cases involving vulnerable populations. Seattle police and federal agencies began to review their protocols, focusing on improving communication, resource allocation, and supporting communities affected by similar crimes. The lessons learned from the Green River Killer case echoed nationwide, urging law enforcement to better protect those who are often overlooked and ensuring that such a tragedy would not repeat itself. The verdict against Gary Ridgway brought justice, but it also left behind a legacy of grief, resilience, and change. For the families, Ridgway's capture ended years of anguish, but the memories of their loved ones live on, etched into the heart of Seattle. His case has since served as a sobering reminder of the horrors that can lurk unseen and the importance of vigilance and justice. While the Green River Killer may be behind bars, the lessons learned from this case continue to shape how law enforcement and society approach justice for the most vulnerable. Though Gary Ridgway confessed to 49 murders, authorities have long suspected that the true number of his victims may be far higher. Ridgway himself admitted that he had lost count of how many women he killed, describing his crimes as a ritual that became almost routine. Detectives, forensic experts, and family members of missing women still question how many more lives he may have taken. For each victim identified, there could be others who remain unaccounted for, their fates sealed along the dark, secluded banks of the Green River. The thought that there may still be families out there waiting for answers casts a haunting shadow over Ridgway's case, a reminder of the unimaginable toll his crimes have taken. In the years following Ridgway's conviction, theories emerged suggesting that he may not have acted alone. Some have speculated that he had an accomplice or, at the very least, connections to others who committed similar crimes. However, no substantial evidence has ever emerged to support these claims, and Ridgway has always maintained that he acted alone. His confessions, cold and precise, appear to align with the evidence investigators gathered over the years. Still, the mystery of his vast knowledge of secluded sites and his ability to evade capture for so long has left room for speculation. Could he have had insight from someone else? Or was he simply an opportunistic predator who knew his city's darkest corners better than anyone? For many families of Ridgway's victims, the pain of their loss remains raw, even with Ridgway behind bars. The memories of their loved ones, their laughter, their hopes, and their lives cut short continue to weigh heavily. Some families have expressed a painful acceptance, recognizing that Ridgway's arrest closed one chapter of anguish, but could never fully bring them peace. Statements from several families reflect their ongoing commitment to remembering their daughters, sisters, and mothers, and their hope that the memory of their loved ones serves as a reminder to protect those vulnerable to similar dangers. For these families, healing is a long, unending journey, marked by the faces and names that the world must never forget. The case of the Green River Killer may have been solved, but questions still linger. The possibility of more victims, the unconfirmed theories, and the impact on countless families remain part of the legacy Ridgway left behind, a reminder of lives that vanished too soon and the justice that, though served, could never truly heal the wounds. In the hearts of the families and the shadows of Seattle, Ridgway's crimes will forever be etched in memory, a story of darkness that can never fully fade. The story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, is one of the darkest chapters in Seattle's history, a chilling reminder of how one man's actions can devastate an entire community. Over nearly 2 decades, Ridgway preyed on the city's most vulnerable, leaving behind a legacy of grief, fear, and unanswered questions. Families were torn apart, lives were forever changed, and a city was left haunted by the memory of a man who hid behind an ordinary face but held unimaginable darkness within. Ridgway's capture and conviction brought justice to some, but the scars he left behind will never fully heal.